Call the meeting to order. All right, shall we stand for the pledge? I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Ms. Shields?
Okay. President McNall.
Here?
Vice President Clements. Here. Trustee Clemenson.
Here.
Trustee Valentine. Here.
Here. Before we move on to the approval of the agenda, Phil, if you would like to.
Yeah, unfortunately, it was with a heavy heart that I informed the community of David Wallick's passing on January 4th. As I know everyone here remembers, David was a valued member of our school community, having served as our elementary school principal from 2017 to 2019. David was an incredibly kind person, and that's been evident many times over in the stories that have been told or shared of David since his passing. He undoubtedly loved Haldane and the Phillipstown community. He loved the arts, and I know that David stayed engaged in seeing our students perform locally, even after his time ended with us here at Haldane. He also loved baseball. He was an avid Mets fan. David and I had many great conversations around the Mets, who are doing a little bit better now than they were then. But he loved his family. They loved him, and I would ask that as we start today's meeting, that the members of our audience join us in a moment of silence in his memory. Thank you.
Moving on to the approval of the agenda. Ms. Shields?
Be it resolved that upon the recommendation of the Superintendent of Schools, the Board of Education hereby approves the agenda as written.
May I have a motion, please?
So moved. Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? No? Great. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for attending in person or virtually. Are we streaming? Oh, great. Great. As you can see, Trustee Headland wasn't able to join us this evening, and we are all very disappointed because John certainly does love a curriculum night. So Peggy has promised to sort of fill in the blanks for him. This is a workshop meeting. The topic tonight is both curriculum instruction detailed report from Mr. Elder, as well as the budget presentation, administrative and capital, and additional propositions in parentheses, if any. The next Board of Education meeting will be held on February 7th, 2023, 7 p.m. in the middle school, high school library of the Haldane Central School District. That'll be a budget presentation. Is that correct? No. Why do I have that there? Doesn't matter. What I will say is that we won't be here because we're going to be ousted again by Haldane Drama, who will be doing Oklahoma right here on this very stage. So, Dr. Benante.
Just a few comments before we transition to our student reports. I just wanted to report to the board that thus far the transition to the Raptor visitor management system, which today was our first day, began and has been going okay. So I'll continue to report on that, but I did want to thank folks at both of the buildings who've, in particular Miss Martin and Miss Murphy, who've been instrumental in just helping us prepare for that transition, and it's gone relatively smoothly. The campus master planning work continues. We've become very accustomed, I think, to Melissa or Tom being at these workshop meetings. That being said, we're still working together on some of those final components that were presented last to the board, and I'm working closely with our staff who work in those impacted areas to arrive at a final recommendation for what to include or not include, specifically right now as it relates to the arts studio spaces. So thanks to Ms. Bronco and Ms. Boonshaw for their efforts and support with this. Then I'll transition on to the music area and the STEM spaces. So once CS Arch has that information back from us and that feedback back from us, they'll be back at a board meeting to present those representations. Assemblywoman Dana Levenberg and I will be meeting in the coming weeks, but I did want to extend my gratitude to her and her support staff for the invitation to attend her inauguration ceremony, which is scheduled for later this week. I cannot attend, but I do appreciate the efforts that the Assemblywoman and again her staff have already made to connect with our school community. And again, I'll be meeting with Dana in a couple weeks' time. That being said, Conrad White, who is one of our students, who's known to many, will be leading the Pledge of Allegiance at her inauguration, and she's made a deliberate effort to engage many students from the surrounding schools, which are part of her respective legislative zone. So Conrad will be there, and Mrs. Sniffin's going to attend in my stead. So thank you, Julia, for being a part of that. I also had an initial meeting with State Senator Rob Rollison last week, closer to home for both of us, but would like to thank also Senator Rollison as he's made his transition into office, also for reaching out and seeking to engage with the broader Phillipstown community. We look forward for him to have him down and visit Haldane sometime in the near future as well. So our local legislators have both reached out in their transitions to office, and that's been positive. With that, we have a few reports, as Sean noted, so I'd like to call up our student representatives to provide the student report for this month. So Gabe and Camilla, come on up. You can use this microphone right here. It's good to see you both. Camilla, you're going to begin?
Yes.
All right, go
Hi,
ahead.
I'm Camilla McDaniel, and I'm the junior class vice president. Firstly, I'm going to talk about the junior college kickoff. As members of the class of 2024, the topic of college seems to be coming around the corner rapidly. Mrs. Cochin, the Haldane College counselor, recently came into all of the juniors' social studies classes to introduce and provide information about beginning the college search and process. An overwhelming subject for many, Mrs. Cochin's talk was incredibly helpful in breaking down the process into smaller parts. We learned what the next steps for us should be and how to explore different colleges on websites such as Naviance. We also were given important insights as to how to differentiate our application and what to focus on in these upcoming months. Furthermore, a college night for junior parents was held Thursday, January 12th. This assisted parents in understanding the future options for their children and how they can be supportive through the process. Looking forward to these next few months, Haldane will be hosting a parent night in room 211 from 6:30 to 8 p.m. on February 16th. This will be for parents with students in grades 9 and 10 with BOCE's representatives to inform about the different choices students can make in grades 11 and 12 regarding opportunities and programming at the Tech Center. In addition, BOCE's is holding a career and technical education and regional union informational event March 23rd from 6 to 9 p.m. As juniors, this is a very stressful turning point in our lives regarding college and our futures. These breakdowns are especially significant because we are given credible advice on the paths we will choose and how to be realistic through the process. Next, Community Week and Battle of the Tunnel. The Battle of the Tunnel has been a long-standing tradition at Haldane. On Friday, January 27th, our varsity boys basketball team will play the annual rivalry game against Beacon at the Haldane gym. The atmosphere is intensified with a trophy and bragging rights on the line. Additionally, the girls' varsity basketball team will play at Beacon that Thursday. This will be the first year that the girls' team will be included in the tradition as well, getting a trophy of their own. As a member of the girls' varsity basketball team, it's been exciting to support the boys' team's games, as well as seeing that support reciprocated for our team. This is my third season on the varsity basketball team, this being the first without the restrictions of COVID. Looking up into the stands and seeing constant cheers and chants has been amazing. It truly shows the unified spirit of Haldane, which will continue to be amplified throughout the rest of the month. Leading up to the Battle of the Tunnel, we have established a community week from January 23rd to January 27th. We have assigned themes to each day. Monday will be Pajama Day, Tuesday is Jersey Day, Wednesday Twin with Someone Else, Thursday is Donation Day, and Friday will be School Colors, Blue and White Day. To elaborate on the Donation Day, the idea is that each high school grade will pick a different organization to donate to, and on this day, students will bring in the supplies necessary for the cause. Similar to Spirit Week for homecoming in the fall, the goal is to continue to bring the Haldane community together, leading up to the suspense of the games at the end of the week.
Hello, my name is Gabe Lunin-Pack, and I'm the junior class president. I'm just going to be talking about some future club tournaments. So on Friday, March 3rd, Bard College will be hosting a high school debate tournament, which our debate team will be attending. The 8 students on the team, from freshman to junior, will practice and research different topics, including energy sufficiency, Puerto Rican statehood, and more. Once there, our students will have the opportunities to both refine and use their debate skills, which they practice each Friday, and to meet students at other schools who are also involved with debate. Students visiting will also get the opportunity to see what a liberal arts college feels like, as following what Camilla said, for many students, this is the time where college searching begins. This debate follows the 2 debate scrimmages that Haldane hosted a few months back on November 18th and December 2nd, where schools Arlington, Dover, and Poughkeepsie traveled to us, and we also worked on debate skills. Those 2 scrimmages helped us prepare debate members for this Bard tournament, where different individual and school awards can be won. Overall, this is going to be a great opportunity for Haldane students to network with kids from other schools, greatly improve our debate skills, and visit a college, which is important. So as well as the future tournament for the Haldane Debate Club, the Haldane Model UN team, which we are both members of, is planning on traveling to Dalton High School for their Model UN Summit. We had a meeting last Wednesday, actually, to discuss fundraising, and we will try to utilize the big sports events coming up to sell concessions in order to make money and fundraise for this trip. This will be the 2nd year in a row that the Haldane Model UN team has visited Dalton, and last year was a huge success, with students learning different parliamentary procedures, as well as meeting students from other schools. However, this year will obviously be very different from last year, as COVID policies are less strict, allowing us to interact more with other kids and have a much more thorough learning experience. While this is very interesting and important news, it is still very early on in the process for the Model UN team, and while plans for fundraising have been made and club members have reached out to the Dalton Model UN team and community, the dates and the prices of the trip have not yet been made public, so there isn't any specific information regarding those 2 things. We hope that this summit will be just as fruitful and beneficial to the members of the team as the one at UConn, which other student government members Josie Foley-Headland and Amelia Allion briefed you all about a few months back. Thank you very much.
Great.
Any questions for our student representatives? Great reports, by the
Great,
way. Thank
yes.
you. Hit on
Thank
a lot
you,
of
Gabe. Thank
lot
you,
of different things going on, and some very exciting, like the tunnel game. I'm glad to hear that our girls team is playing, involved in that. I know that's something that they were interested years ago in doing, so that's great to hear, Camilla. And then some of the academic work that's going on as well. So great report. Thank you for that. At this time, if any of our board members have questions for our student rep.
No, that was terrific. Thank you, Gabe. Thank you.
One question. We're not going to let you get away without any questions then. Camilla, you spoke to, and either of you or both of you can answer this, the stress that comes with junior year. and we hear that a lot, and we've lived that too. Talk a little bit, because you're not just engaged in your academics, you're engaged in extracurriculars, as you both spoke to. How are you managing that stress? What are some things that you're doing for yourself, or advice that you would give to other students, maybe your underclassmen friends who are going to come into their junior year and be managing? It's a heavy course load and a heavy extracurricular load as well. What is some advice that you would give them to help manage that stress that you spoke to earlier? Go ahead, Gabe.
Well, going into junior year, I have a lot of extracurriculars, and I like to say that I'm taking hard classes. While there are kids who are taking harder classes, I was spending a lot of time on my phone, and that was a huge issue. So the first thing I did as I started to struggle in classes, I deleted TikTok and made sure I was spending less time on my phone, which seems simple and obvious, but I mean, I didn't do it sophomore year, I didn't do it freshman year, and I still was working on school and different extracurriculars, and that's actually made a huge impact, which it makes sense. I was spending hours on it a day, and that's been really helpful.
Good, love it. Camilla?
Well, as well as Gabe, I'm in a lot of extracurriculars and sports teams and taking hard AP classes. And I think even still, I've struggled to figure out how to find a balance to manage everything. But I would say that it's kind of forced me to prioritize studying and doing my homework efficiently because in order to keep up my grades.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel like it's just kind of forced me to do that.
Sure, it's important to have those routines. And good luck finding that balance. When you figure it out,
That's right.
let us know, because we all would benefit from that as well. One last question. You, in this process, right, you've come up through the high school now and you've been a part of it for long enough, I'm sure, to have found experiences that were most helpful to put yourself in a position to be successful. You both had a lot of success at the school. Share with us just one of those things that you found that Haldane provided you that you think is really helpful to your experience here. Just one. I know there's many.
I would say this year I've utilized 10th period a lot, and I think in 9th and 10th grade I didn't really go that much, but this year I've kind of had to, and it's just been very helpful in order to study for tests that I have in all my classes. I've gone almost every day, and I never really realized how beneficial it can be until this year.
Thank you. Gabe?
Well, I've also really utilized 10th periods, and I've been seeing a lot of great things come from that. The number one thing that's helped me here at Haldane has probably been sports, and because I'm not that athletic, but because Haldane's such a small school, it's not too hard to get on a sports team. So when I came here, 9th grade was COVID year, and I came here from Garrison. So 10th grade, when everything started opening back up, I got on the baseball team, and it was a great way to meet new people, which really helped me flourish in both an academic and a social setting.
Very good. All right. We know you're very busy. Thank you for your report. If you have to scoot, that's fine. You're welcome to stay for the entire meeting. But if not, it's okay to go too. So thank your parents too for us. Thank you, Gabe. Thank you, Camilla.
Both. Okay, moving on to our special presentation. This is the budget presentation, 23-24. Know what kind of setup we need to do.
Yeah, so we'll just need a minute to transition here.
Of course.
And I will take the lead. You're good, Megan. Will you advance slides for me, Megan?
I certainly can.
There's only a few.
There is sorry.
There we go. Okay.
I stopped short of asking about later start times at the high school because I figured that might be a can of worms.
Thank you for not opening up that topic tonight, Sean.
I have my student council working on that.
To come. So as I mentioned, I'm sorry. One. So as I mentioned, Catherine and I will take the lead for this presentation. I'm going to get us started, and then I'm going to turn it over to Catherine as we begin the series of presentations that we provide to the Board of Education as we work through budget development for the upcoming school year. Our agenda for this evening includes going over, circling back to budget development parameters, which we typically work with the board to establish in December. I asked you for a little bit more time on that, so I have some thoughts related to it to share with you this evening. The administrative and the capital components of the budget, which Catherine will dig into with you, as well as we do anticipate having a vehicle purchase proposition this year as well. Catherine will share the details related to that. Thank you, Megan. So the good news is the anticipated increase in foundation aid, which is estimated to be approximately $750,000, and what we will see is our increase in the tax levy should allow us to continue to make key investments in student programming. So some of this is still left to flesh out what recommendations we're going to be making, but we can anticipate that they're going to extend from work that is related to master scheduling, that's ongoing, the special education audit, which Regina is in the process of overseeing, continued professional learning for our staff, and the maintenance of a review and likely a recommendation to maintain the position that was supported by the COVID era relief funds. You may recall, we didn't receive a lot of COVID relief money, but the money that we did receive, we directed towards hiring an interventionist at the elementary school. A level of that funding is going to carry into next school year, but we will have exhausted it probably in the fall at some point. So I think going into next school year, we feel good about the work that individual has done, the support they provide to our elementary school, and we'd like to continue that position going into next year. So our recommendations are likely to center around the work that's going on or related to those 4 areas. And obviously we'll give consideration to the thoughts and perspective that the board may provide along the way. But in many ways, this is a continuation of work or extension of work that you've supported in previous year's budget development. Recommendations are going to come out of that work, and we're going to look now to fund those recommendations in next year's budget development process. The governor has indicated through her State of the State address and the executive budget proposal that she's going to recommend, again, the full restoration of foundation aid. So that's good news for us. We received the partial level of funding last school year. The rest, the remaining of it, should come in preparation for next school year, which keeps us in I would say, an anticipated favorable budget environment. The one key figure that's still unanticipated or unknown, but we'll get clarity on over the next month, is what that levy is. I've typically shared with the board a recommendation to develop the budget to the levy limit. I'm pausing on that this year. I want to see what the levy limit is and probably have a discussion at that point. And I say that because we're not used to having this much foundation aid coming in. We're doing work around campus master planning that may likely lead to a recommendation for a proposition next year. And this may be a year, depending on what our levy limit is, to say, okay, we're able to fund some enhancements to our program, taking into consideration the foundation aid, and maybe not going all the way up to the levy limit, and just being mindful of that in anticipation of what we may ask the community to support next year. These are hypotheticals, but that's something I'm being deliberate with until we actually see what that levy limit is, until we see the rest of our budget figures kind of come to a higher level of clarity, and then working with the board to establish what that figure is that we should levy a little bit further down the road here in budget development. So I'd like to just pause if there's any questions for me on that bigger picture overview before I turn it over to Catherine.
Ask one quick question,
Yep.
and this is something that we talk about all the time, but just sort of for everybody, if anyone's watching, could you just briefly talk about the work, the master scheduling work, and is that ongoing every single year, or is this something more like a project that will sort of be static once you get to that?
Yeah, so this is a more significant review of our master schedule in which we're actually looking at the schedules that each of the buildings run on. And whether or not there need to be more significant changes to those that will allow us to do a few things. I think our experience as an administration is that there's, because the buildings run on 3 different schedules, and I'll point more so to the middle and high school, and speak of the elementary almost separately, it does not allow for us, or we're wondering, because you'll never know until you readjust the schedule, if we could realize greater efficiency in how we assign staff if the 2 schools are running on a similar schedule. We won't know that until we actually create the schedule, but the way they currently operate, it doesn't allow us to really look into that. And I'll give you an example of what you see that may be a consequence of this. You've approved a number of 6-period assignments. You've even approved a 7th-period assignment for our special education staff. And most, if not all of those, are secondary special education teachers, are wondering going into this, just as an example, is by moving the 2 schools potentially to more consistent schedules, again, could we more effectively deploy those staff where we can have address broader student needs, and then also ideally keep them to their contractual workday, not incur additional cost through 6th and 7th period assignments. And hey, we budget for that to a degree, redirect that money, whether it be into further staffing of other program areas or something else entirely. That's just an example of really digging down into re-examining whether we could bring these 2 schedules in greater alignment. Some of the good things that may come from that. We're not there yet, but that's what we're entertaining as we're going into the work. So I will qualify it, Maggie, as more comprehensive review of our master schedule. That being said, you're always, to answer how you led, you're always doing tweaking and modifying to your schedule. But this, I would say, is much more substantive than the routine year-to-year work that we do.
Thank you.
One quick question. The position that was created with the COVID funds, that's a HFA position, that interventionist? Okay.
Yeah. And it functions, I say interventions, it functions as an academic intervention teacher. Ms. Pastula, that's essentially the service she's providing to us. She has broader leverage than that, or broader responsibilities, but in essence, she's working as an academic interventionist. And yep, it's a titled position within the HFA.
Thank you.
And on that too, remind me, is Ms. Pastula, she's on a year-to-year contract, right? That's how we've been thinking about the position.
It's not set up that way.
Right.
When we created the position, we appointed her
Right.
as a full-time teacher. So she's accruing seniority in that position. She's aware her position's grant funded, but since we've had potentially other retirees
Right.
in other elementary positions, because she's in an elementary tenure area, she actually, if we were to, for some reason, not fulfill the position, Ms. Pastula actually can go into another,
Right.
potentially another position in the district. That being said, she's doing good work in the position that she's in, and we very well may have the opportunity just to maintain that. Because she actually has more seniority now than some of our other more recent hires that we've had.
Well, she was a bright light in the middle of COVID, so I
She
saw
was.
lots of her on the screen.
She was.
So.
There were several. She was one of them. Okay. With this, I'll turn it over to Catherine to talk about the administrative capital and components in the proposition. I'll step aside.
Thank you. Okay. What we have here is just a listing of what parts of the school district are included in the administrative component. It's pretty much the same year over year. The only thing I'd like to point out to you here is we did this year separate the salary for the Director of Human Resources and Director of Curriculum into two separate components. So Director of Human Resources is now in staff, and Director of Curriculum is in instructional administration. So that's just a small change on there. Okay, so then what we put together was a look back of a few years of actual, and then this year's budget, and looking at a moment in time of where we're projected to end at 22-23. Again, it's only January, so there will be some changes to the projected numbers, but it's a pretty good look forward as to where we think the year will end. As I give you a minute to look at it, the couple things I just want to point out to you that I see as possible questions is there is a decrease in the finance line from budget to projected, and that is because our budget last year was set up for the reorganization of the business office with hiring a new school business manager and a full-time accountant. But as you know, that switched this year with me taking on the role of school business manager and contracting out to MAG for the accounting services. So you'll see the difference in there. That is the primary difference there. Another one that stands out is the decrease right now from budget to projected in administration. That is a few expenses that we don't have final numbers for. We're waiting on. Some will be increases, and for instance, master scheduling, we haven't received a bill for it yet. It was in the budgeted numbers, but it actually looks like it's going to come in under budget, so we're kind of waiting to get those final numbers before I add that into projected for you. The other thing that is not included in the projected this year is the portion of the Dean of Student and Athletic Director's salary that is allocated to administration, because currently we have an interim serving and all his funds are being charged to the athletic department. We also have a projected number in related employee benefits. How we calculate employee benefits is a percentage that's allocated based on staffing needs. So we recalculate that every couple years. We did recalculate it. So this is the amount that we have allocated to the administrative component this year. The decrease will not, the difference to budget won't be as significant as it shows right now because we're waiting for final TRS accruals, and the calculation of the TRS will come out of that and make it more in line with past years. So I don't know if you want to look at this and ask me if there's any questions, or if you want to go on to capital and then.
When do we typically, when is TRS typically determined?
We'll be getting an updated, we usually get an updating listing in February, and the accrual usually takes place in June. But I've been looking at seeing if there's a way to, process that sooner than as a end of year entry, just so the numbers kind of pop into what you're seeing each month on the appropriation status report on an earlier basis than waiting for the final June numbers. Okay.
You anticipated all of our questions.
Okay, so the capital component is, again, it's just the portions of the budget that we allocate to the capital component. It's primarily our operations and maintenance department, and there were no significant changes to that from last year with what we did in our budget for where capital is. For the capital component trends and projections, it looks like overall we're doing pretty much in line with what we were expecting. We do have a little bit of a decrease in overall operations and maintenance. We do have some open positions. We are currently using an interim director of facilities as opposed to the full-time, so there is some adjustments that you're seeing there. Again, the related employee benefits did decrease, again, because it's an estimate based on the positions that you have. So while we do have some unfilled positions, you're seeing some variances there. And then just for intrafund transfers, I took it upon myself to assume that, as always, we will be taking care of the lunch deficit. So rather than keeping it at the budget that was set prior to when we had our big adjustment last year, I looked at where we stand right now with what we think it might possibly be. Intrafund transfers will always change based on what kind of excess fund balance we have at the end of the year. But right now, I'm looking to show that about $150,000 to cover the lunch as usual.
A question, since we do know, this is about the interfund transfers, since we know we generally carry over for that purpose, is there a reason why we budgeted $65,000 for 22-23 rather than a higher number since we're anticipating it, or was it just a...
That is about a standard number that we've been using year over year. Yeah. Obviously, it wasn't my budget last year, so I don't know exactly what caused, was that. But it is something we could certainly look to going forward if that it is a number that we should adjust right from the beginning.
Yeah. I mean, I know it's partially was inflated because of COVID and because of our extra expenses there, but okay. And then I would expect that as we're planning for filling those positions for next year, we'll see the year-over-year budget reflect that increase.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
And then we do plan to have a vehicle proposition. I had been working with Tim and then Mike Twardy, and now I've been working with Mike Lissakatis and different people for what they think we need. We currently have 4 minivans that we have not been able to get for the past 2 budget cycles, just due to the conditions in the vehicle market, that we've already placed an order for and are just waiting on delivery and availability. So this year, it seems as if we will be fine with replacing just one of the smaller 30-passenger buses. So it became a year where it looked like maybe we could take a look at our maintenance vehicles. We have a lot of maintenance vehicles that have a lot of wear and tear on them, and the recommendation was to replace a tractor and the pickup truck that we use with the plow and sander. We, as you know, we do kind of have a cycle of how we're going to replace our vehicles going forward. We do know next year will be bus heavy again, but this seemed like a year that we could get some maintenance vehicles put in.
This is not chiefly a budgetary question. This might be best for our interim director of transportation and grounds, but there are no mandates about electrical vehicles outside of buses that are coming down from the state, correct? There's no, it's that.
I haven't seen it.
Yeah.
No.
No. Okay. Thank you. Just curious.
And when does that mandate hit for electric buses? Have they confirmed that yet?
25?
Yeah, 5.
I believe we can provide you with the specific language. You said 2025. I think it's 2027.
27.
It's somewhere in that
Right.
that range. And again, the specifics, I can refer you back to that. Any new vehicle purchased at that point has to be electric. Yet you have until, I want to say it's 2035 for your entire fleet to be converted. We can do that on a faster schedule. Obviously, we would have to dig into the numbers related to that. But those are the floor, if you will, expectation of how we begin to approach that work.
Great. Thank you. I know this is a bit of a curveball, but thank you so much, Kathy.
That's okay. I knew there was a 5 in there somewhere. So I don't know if anyone has any other questions, but that is the presentation for the evening.
No, this looks very clear to me. Thank you for thank you so much for this, your first presentation here on this one. Wonderful job, as always. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
As we're transitioning out, Sean, if I remember the agenda correctly, we're going to transition now to Josh's presentation on curriculum and instruction, which also includes an overview of last year's state assessment results. As a reminder to the board, by board policy, a review or presentation of the state assessment results is required on an annual basis, as well as matters related to curriculum and instruction. So, Josh is going to provide an overview of that. There are some specific projects that will also be discussed by the building principals and their specific reports as well in months to come. So Josh is going to provide a high-level overview. He can certainly get into the details because he's very closely involved in those projects, but I just want the board to be aware that our building principals as well will be providing reports on some specific projects as well as part of their annual reports to the board. So with that, Josh, I'll let you take the front. Here.
You don't want to be right in front of the screen.
Good evening, everybody. For those of you who may be watching, my name is Josh Elder. I'm the Director of Curriculum and Human Resources, and it's my pleasure tonight to provide you with a curriculum overview, as well as Dr. Benante said, just a snapshot of our New York State assessment results from the spring of 2022. So you have the presentation in front of you, and one of the things I always like to start off in trying to frame a conversation about curriculum and instruction is, curriculum, local curriculum is really devised of two areas. You have your state mandates, which requires, which articulates what students should be able to know and be able to do as a result of instruction. And then those are combined with really what a local district values, right? The priorities, the skills, that both the district, teachers, and the community feel are very important. And so you mesh those things together in trying to decide and assess the ways in which students have actually met those benchmarks. And one of the things that I've always said is that, you can travel in New York State to multiple school districts, and in theory, they're being decided they have to meet the same benchmarks, but you go into these classrooms and they look very, very different depending on where you are. And I think that's the real beauty of how the local curriculum kind of comes into play and how a community feel comes into play in trying to decide what those actually activities and how students meet those assessments. Right? So along those lines, we take a look at the intersection of multiple ways in which we assess our curriculums. And, at the top of that pinnacle is always, I believe, local classrooms, right? The ways in which teachers are designing learning activities and the ways teachers are designing assessments to really assess whether students have met those benchmarks. The benchmarks come from New York State, obviously, and then we use another variety of assessments through third parties, and I've listed there the NWA map, which is another way in which we kind of assess to try to weigh. So the real idea here is trying to take a look at the intersection of multiple points and deciding in which ways and how well our students are doing. Tonight, to kind of start off with, we're going to kind of focus a little bit on the New York State Ed piece because that's an annual way, and as Dr. Benante said, required by law to provide you what those updates are. So transitioning it. So the New York State assessments are providing grades 3 through 8, and they're on-demand tests that are designed to measure students' proficiency with the New York State learning standards. We provide those in English language arts, grades 3 through 8, mathematics 3 through 8, as well as science, grades 4 through 8, which will change next year to grades 5 and 8. So this year's fourth grade students are exempt from taking that exam this year in preparation for what they do next year. The tests are basically untimed. They're administered in 2 sessions. They're aligned with New York State learning standards. They're developed by a sample of New York State teachers. They have both multiple choice and open-ended items on each exam. And the questions are designed to measure critical thinking, problem solving, written language, and often require students to describe and to defend reasoning. And some of the questions are released with state test results, and some of the and the results are shared with both teachers and parents. Oh, twice. So just some quick disclaimers to talk about these assessments. When I was up here last spring, this was the first one in 2021, and because of the participation rates across the state, which were drastically lower than in previous years, due to a multitude of factors basically arising from coming out of the COVID world. Some districts were able to offer more in-person versus more hybrid. Some students stayed home, some did. That the Department of Education released that because of the participation rates, that they were not to be compared of previous school years. So the results were not to be utilized to compare to previous school years statewide or among some groups of students. And so as a result, the department did not make available statewide comparisons of data, and only districts and school level data were posted on the department's website. So that was that idea that they weren't using this, that they were going to compare against other districts in other years past based upon the participation rates. As we look to this year, they have, do I go back? Can I do that? I can't see that, so I'm so sorry. That's good. Thank you so much. Sorry about that, Megan. The disclaimer they placed on this year's assessment results was just simply due to the ongoing impacts of COVID, it may not be appropriate to compare the 2021-22 assessment results with prior years. Not to say that school districts don't do that, just basically acknowledging that as we still kind of continue through this process of coming out of the impacts of the closures and COVID, that it's enough for at least for the state to at least issue a statement that just says, look, based upon these, each school district has to kind of take a look at their results, and it may not be very wise to compare them against previous years prior to that. That being said, I believe that here in Haldane, our participation rates amongst these assessments last year were very strong, particularly in grades 3, 4, 5, and 6. You can say a really high degree of participation rate in both the English and math. And that kind of, moves down differently in our 7th and 8th grade cohorts. Just something to note there with the math and science of grade 8, right? This is the year that there are different opportunities for students. So we have the opportunity for 8th grade students to accelerate and take the Algebra 1 Regents at the end of 8th grade year, as well as the Living Environment exam at the end of 8th grade year. So those students in our district are not required to take the New York State Math 8 or the Science 8 examination in that, so they're not included with that, which is the reason why you see, one of the reasons why I would say that the participations drop down to 29% for our 8th graders in both math and science in those years, right? That being said, the first slide here just kind of articulates and communicates how our students fared in grades 3 through 5 by grade level in English language arts. And just briefly to talk about what you see here is the comparable schools, which is the red, is comprised of Putnam Valley, North Salem, and Croton-on-Hudson. Their results were lumped in together to kind of create that graph. And then obviously the yellow graph talks about performance in statewide New York State, right? And so you see in grade 3 ELA 61%, grade 4 63%, and grade 5 is 64% proficiency, which would be a score of 3 or 4 on the New York State assessment. So I should stop for a second, right? They're scaled on a score of grades 1, 2, 3, or 4, commonly with a score of 3 or 4 demonstrating proficiency against New York State learning standards. 2 would be approaching or developing, and 1 would be working towards. Staying on that trend with English language arts in grades 6 through 8, same thing, same comparable schools. And in grade 6, you see a 73% proficiency rate. Grade 7 was also at 73 proficiency rate, and grade 8 at a 66 proficiency rate on the ELA standards. And then it did break it down into ELA subgroups, percent of students achieving proficiency. My apologies, there is a quick error. The Haldane student with disabilities should read 25%, not 23%, so I will make that update. I caught that one late tonight. And then the economically disadvantaged is at 40%. The reason why you won't see a red graph there is that data was not easily available to kind of coalesce and pull together to make that comparison with that. Yep.
How many students would be included in those subgroups?
Yeah, sure. So in Haldane, with students with disabilities, that number comprised of all students 3 through 8 is 36 students, right? So rabbit holes, but getting into some of the statistics, when you start comparing to other schools, this is where it gets a little iffy in some ways, right? So Croton-on-Hudson, for example, had 100 students from that same subgroup. North Salem had 60 students, and Putnam Valley as well had 60 students. And so, the numbers get skewed a little bit by that, bottom number. When we start talking when it's talking about economically disadvantaged students, there were 43 students within that subgroup 3 through 8.
And I would imagine, just as sort of across that it must often be the case, or sometimes the case, that students with disabilities would also be economically disadvantaged. And I'm curious about, when you're telling that story with these, like, how is that indicated? How do we?
Yeah, Sean, to be honest with you, I have not taken a look at the cross-section of those two. I would agree that my assumption would be that there could be some crossovers of that, but can be something to follow up with. I don't have that readily available right now.
Thank you.
Yep. Right. And if we go on to mathematics, right, you got 3 through 5 that way. Similar, you see in grades 3 is 71%, grade 4 63%, and grade 5 at 51% when we talk proficiencies. Mathematics 6 through 8, grade 6 you have 59%, grade 7 is 63%, and grade 8 17%. There's a piece missing there. Right. So the 8th grade is worth mentioning and just kind of pausing and articulating a little bit. Right. So we had 38 students participate in algebra regents, the Algebra 1 regents, and 18 students participate in the New York State Math 8. So the number that you see there against other comparables is a denominator of 18 students as compared to other districts. Just to give some numbers around that, if you're looking comparables, Croton-on-Hudson had 118 students take the New York State Math 8 exam. Putnam Valley had 44, and North Salem had 48 students take the Math 8 exam. So again, the denominator comes into play a little bit in how that impacts how students are performing when it talks about proficiency at that level. And then again, oh,
Josh, real
Yep.
quick, if you go back to that, though,
thanks, Megan.
just to,
Ms. Schultz.
and not to harp on the point, but other schools in New York State would also be taking out students to take algebra, to take the algebra
Yeah.
regents. And so, would you say that grade 8 number there is an outlier for us to show concern?
I think the issue, what would be need to tease out a little bit when you're taking a look at New York State, which is a breadth of school districts, is some districts, if you take Algebra 1, you also take the New York State Math 8, right? And so they take both. And so, I mean, that's a way that schools do that. And, well, that's one interpretation, is they're messing with their numbers, right? It would definitely impact, I think, your numbers of proficiency rates, because as you'll see in a future slide, that for our students in 8th grade who took the Algebra 1 Regents, every single one of them passed, and I think we had a over 50% mastery rate of that. So one can conclude that if they took the Math 8, they'd be placing in a high level 4 as well. So I think that's one way that might impact a little bit, and that gets a little bit with the comparable schools as well. Just the numbers seem to muck it up. And I mean, Croton-on-Hudson in this example skews the numbers because of the number of students who took it and the number of students who proficiency brings that one up. So I think the bigger issue as you look at Haldane, it's a combination of also, I mean, 18 is a small denominator when you're looking at these, and you start getting 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 moving up or down in one of those ways can have an impact percentage points wise as to what that looks like.
Is it a useful number then for you to analyze or no? Meaning so these are our 8th grade students, and then you're able to go to, these would be our current 9th grade students, correct? So just, is that useful at all for planning?
I think I think any data point tells something if you look at it into ways of what that might tell you. I mean, I think one thing that I would say that it's not in here, but if you go back 10 years and look at the grade 8 results here in Haldane, it's roughly the same, right? It's not like a peak and up or a down kind of thing. It tends, one could argue the assumption is it is a function of the numbers of here that take it, and it seems to be pretty consistent that way. At the same time, I mean, you can start asking branching questions off of that are there ways that we move that on? What do students do when they reach Algebra 1 that following year? Or is it a barrier to them graduating, which I don't think is something that we've seen, that students, when they move on from Math 8, they get into Algebra 1 and they perform and they pass and they move on and get their math credit that way. But I do think anytime you look at that, I can sit here and say it's only 18 students, but they're 18 students, right? And I think that there have been conversations, and you'll see a little bit, I think, as we get moving forward about when we see that, what we might be thinking about doing in terms of possibilities of impacting that 8th grade.
Yeah, but you don't see a knee-jerk reaction there.
I don't generally see a knee-jerk reaction
And you just pointed out that over 10 years of data, you've seen roughly the same thing.
Roughly the same thing.
It's not COVID, it's not, it really is a structure of the statistic in front of you.
Seems to be.
Okay.
It's one way, yeah.
I mean, I certainly appreciate that, and I think it's always really important in presenting, especially the 8th grade results, state testing results, that we do have larger than it used to be. I mean, that's a real area of success. Like a lot of students now have the choice. It's not made for them, but for a number of years, students have the choice to take this advanced course. Mm-hmm. That being said, we're still talking about 15 8th graders who didn't have mastery at 8th grade right before they're going into high school math. I mean, I think there's clearly room for improvement, mm-hmm. right? I mean, that's a meaningful number of kids,
Sure.
That haven't reached proficiency in math before they go into high school. And I think it's something for us. I know that, we're thinking about changing the math curriculum. I mean, again, I don't want to disregard the things that you said, but clearly it's room for improvement.
Yep. And I think if we hold that thought, if we get a little bit later, I think you're going to see some ways in which I think as a group we've started to look at that in different ways from different parts of the organization.
Great.
Yeah. Right. Same scenario with subgroups of students achieving proficiency. In Haldane, to give some perspective, the students with disabilities, that is 35 students in that subgroup of 3 through 8, and it is 40 students in the subgroup of economically disadvantaged. into science, grades 4 and 8 last year, right? And so 92% of our fourth graders achieved proficiency in science, and in 8th grade, that number is 67% achieved proficiency. And so again, just to point out, 39 of our 8th grade students took the living environment regions, and 18 students took the New York State Science 8. So of those 18, 67% of them achieved proficiency on the grade 8 science assessment.
I mean, and that just it goes to show that there actually really are opportunities. It is possible. This is not a group of students. I know it's not the same 18, but it's not a group of students that can't meet proficiency.
Yep.
You know, that they're academically have the ability for the most part to do that.
Yep. And so one piece before we transition all to high school regents is the subgroup of students, middle school students, we spoke about them, how they performed on the regents examination. So every student who took living environment passed in the 8th grade, with 69% of them achieving mastery, which is 85 or higher on that examination, and 31% passing. And then in Algebra 1, you have 71% of those 38 students achieved a score of 85 or higher in mastery, and 29% of them passed that exam. But again, 100% of all students in 8th grade of the 38 students who took the Algebra 1 passed the Algebra 1 and got the credit and moved forward.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, tremendous. So transitioning just off of the 3 through 8 assessments, we'll get into some performance about our high school and their Regents exams. This is just another disclaimer that they say very much the same thing. It may not be appropriate to compare the 2021-2022 New York State Standardized Assessment results with that from prior years. The above just talks a little bit about that the annual Regents exams administered in August, January, and June of the reporting year. The administration of the exam of August 21, January 22, as well as the June 22 of the U.S. Regents in History were canceled. I'll allude to that a little bit later, but they did not offer the United States History Regents exam last year. So Haldane administered the following Regents exams in 2022. We had the English Common Core, we had Algebra 1, Geometry, Earth Science, Living Environment, Chemistry, and Global History, which was definitely back to the old way. We did not administer this many in 2021, right? Many were canceled or offered, so it was a smaller subgroup, and last year was obviously a larger. All these exams are multiple choice and have open-ended. Students take the exam when they've completed the course of study, and just as another thing, New York State did not offer the Regents exam in U.S. History and Government in 2022. That exam did not happen. These exams are scaled on a 3, 4, or 5 method, a 1 through 5 method, right? Just a little bit different. So on the right-hand side, a performance level of 5 is exceeding the Common Core expectations. It's basically considered mastery. A level 4 is meeting the Common Core, and students who scored at a level 3 have scaled score equivalent between 60 and 75. So it's officially defined as partially meeting Common Core expectations, but in terms of analysis, a student with a 3 or higher is considered at proficiency with these. So with Common Core ELA, you have an overall proficiency rate of 96% and broken down between mastery and level 3 and 4. In Global History, it's 92% proficiency, broken down with 54% that being mastery. Geometry is 66%, with 25% being mastery. And Algebra 1, which is combined of both middle school and high school, is 89% proficiency, with 33% of those achieving mastery. And then the other exams that are offered, these ones are scaled on a 1 through 4 scale, with level 3 or 4 being considered mastery. We have Living Environment, an overall of 90% proficiency rate, broken down between mastery and level 3. Earth Science was 63% overall. And lastly, Chemistry would be 78% overall proficiency rate. Going to pause for a minute because I transitioned to a different part of the presentation than just the numbers. Okay. So I think one of the great things leading off of that is the question that I think every school district is frames about is how do we assess what we value? And I think to talk about this. You have the New York State assessments are one piece of that, right? We have high numbers of participation, and so there's one indication of assessing students against New York State standards and how well our local curriculum is meeting that need. And then there's another aspect of this, which is the local part we talked about, the things that we value, the thing that the community values, the teachers, the students. And so how do we go about assessing some of those? And so what I wanted to provide here was a little bit of an update of what our foci have been through the beginning of the school year, as well as what we might be thinking about moving into next year, right? So one of the things is a continuation of what we started last year, which comes from the Strategic Coherence Plan, which is the first strategy, which is creating a system that ensures the ongoing development and implementation of vertically and horizontally aligned curriculum that supports the attainment of the Haldane Essentials. And this was begun last year and continues into this year. And this is just a snapshot of one of a shared drive we have within our district, which is a way in which we house all of our local curriculum that's being developed, which was something that we created at the end of last year. So teachers spent a tremendous amount of last year just documenting and articulating curriculum, albeit many of that had to be done in isolation because of COVID was still moving forward and those types of things, but it started to branch out into opportunities where it was more collaborative, which is really what curriculum work is. It's not sitting in a classroom by yourself, but engaging with colleagues around these discussions and conversations about how we embed these standards and then the ways in which we go about assessing them. So just some kind of updates along that line. We did create a Haldane curriculum shared drive where teachers had, which acts as a repository for where these curriculum developments live. And these curriculums are both the unit overview, which is kind of a long kind of a overview of the entire year, and teachers have also populated this with unit-specific areas that they've been working on. And within those documents are a couple of ways in which we are intentional about our Haldane Essentials, and in which ways we're really going about and embedding these ideas of critical thinking and communication and emotional intelligence within curriculum. So that process continues to move forward. Last summer, there were 233 hours of summer curriculum writing in 2022. So this was something that we offer teachers at the end of the year to get together over the summer, and those 233 hours were spent in new course development. We had teachers start teaching some different courses, so there was an opportunity to engage in that. Curriculum refinement, just going back and refining areas that they had started on and working with, and also in areas of co-teaching, working with co-teaching partners to kind of document curriculum. It's important to note there, I think it's embedded in all that process is articulating that through these documents that were created during the 2020-21 school year. And so I'll share this in a little bit, but it's the idea where this articulation of curriculum is the norm. It's not this outside thing that you just do, but it becomes part of the culture in which how we collaborate with individuals and one of the aspects of those. And obviously our November 8th Superintendent's Conference Day this past year was provided opportunities for the horizontal and vertical articulation at our secondary level, and utilize the articulation curriculum, and that same thing was applied with our K-5, which was focused a little bit more around effective elements of literacy instruction, but also had a component of documenting it. So it's kind of starting to embed itself through that process. I'd be remiss if I didn't just pause for a quick second and say that, my colleagues over here, Ms. Jamin, Ms. Selke, and Ms. Sniffen are instrumental in keeping this work forward, right? It's through their faculty meetings, conversations with teachers that keeps this process kind of moving forward. So it's great. I think what's great about some of these bullet points up there is not just what they represent, but the process in which these things start to happen. So teasing off of that a little bit from more of a kind of a bigger picture is some of the areas that we've kind of leaned into specifically that are a little bit more targeted in curriculum areas. And so in the elementary school, we're thrilled to have a consultant work with us. Her name is Megan Hargrave, really focusing on literacy professional development, which is focusing on best practices in literacy instruction, right? This idea of mending aspects of teachers' college units and the science of reading and what the best practices in each of those areas are with our faculty and staff. And so far through the first half of the year, which has really been targeted at looking at small group instruction and using data to kind of really maximize and individualize small group instruction within a classroom setting. The great thing about these is this is happening not in individual ways, but grade level bands. So teachers are coming together and really starting to articulate those common practices and best practices they're seeing K-5 from that. We continue to move forward with our elementary math resource adoption, right? We just So the committee we've been piloting those resources throughout both the fall of the two, and we've also been able to schedule opportunities to learn from other districts that have recently switched over in those areas, and so we've been able to do that via Zoom, which has enabled us to kind of ask some questions about their implementation process as well as what they've learned from kind of moving to those things. So that's been very good. And the rest of the year we'll be thinking about obviously making a decision, then preparing for the fall. And that was a part of the reasons why, if you remember from at the end of last year, we kind of stopped and didn't really make one, is we didn't think we were in a position where we'd be able to really implement with fidelity in a really good way. So we kind of scaled that back a little bit, but we've set ourselves up nicely for going into the 2023-24 school year, really feeling confident about implementing a new way with some development of there. Really arising out of conversations through middle school with Ms. Jamin and Dr. Selke, and Tom Vergidamo and Michelle Hartford, who kind of are the department chairs and coordinators for math, is really taking a look at this a resource that we could be utilizing grades 3 through 9 that really helps to differentiate mathematics instruction as a Tier 1 resource for all students that is directly tied to the NWA assessments that we already provide. And so this was piloted in a very small way, but based upon kind of early results, I think one of the things that we're starting to look at are there ways that we could expand this as really being a impactful practice for all of our students to have grades 3 through 9. Many school districts have an additional resource for kids to work on outside of just their program, and so this one may have multiple resources. This would be a way of just trying to take a look at one resource we thought would be impactful. High school math is looking at examining their Algebra 1 pathways leading into Algebra 1, which is a question we were just kind of talking about, was as students move from grade 8 into Algebra 1 with that proficiency, are there ways of looking at what that looks like in the 9th grade and what those opportunities may be. Obviously, the New York State Science Next Generation Standards are implementing, right? So I alluded to next year in grades 5 and 8, there'll be a new assessment aligned to the new standards. One of the aspects of that is preparing for the performance tasks, which replaces kind of the end-of-year standalone performance task, right? It's embedded in multiple grade levels now, so science teachers have been working on about the best ways to implement that as well as aligning their curriculum to the new standards. And we've, as an administrative group with a set of teachers, have been participating in this regional professional development through PNW BOCES, talking about data team exploration and taking a look at the way our current data teams focus, but really talking about ways that we might be able to expand that practice into other areas that we might not currently have. We just came back from that one last week, and there's one more session that happens in March, but we feel like we've really had some really strong conversations about that and have some practical ideas for thinking about what some of our next steps may be.
Josh, I just don't want to lose a thread of something you had mentioned earlier with respect to the 8th grade math results, and you presented here of the examination of the Algebra 1 pathways. And this might be you, some of it might be Julia, because I think she alluded to it in her board report, so
yes.
However you choose to approach this is fine. But what are you thinking there? What have you discerned in talking through this together, why it's necessary to examine the Algebra 1 pathways, and I don't want you to predict the future because
Sure.
it may be work that's ongoing, but what might that look like? What are
Sure.
the implications of it?
So it's born really, and Ms. Sniffen can allude to it, but also the high school math department chair, Lou Sassano, and his team looking at how students have performed coming into that pathway and taking a look at the way it's currently set up with students who could take Algebra 1. There's a lab attached to it. And then also looking at regional trends in the area. And so, Mr. Sassano's been going to the regional professional developments, and this seems to be a topic amongst many schools talking about that kind of 8-9 transition with Algebra 1, really on the focus of, the way that I would present it from what I've heard is that really trying to beef up students' experience, that they're not just getting by in Algebra 1, but they're achieving a level of mastery in Algebra 1, which sets the stage for what they take moving forward. And I can say that it is a conversation that happens in other districts around what is that best way. And so some schools kind of have a 2-year pathway where they're talking about Algebra 1. You have the 8th grade and it goes into kind of an Algebra 1A to an Algebra 1B, so to speak, right? Instead of kind of moving that mastery in just a 1 year, they kind of spread that over 2 years. I'm not saying that's what we're doing here in Haldane, but that tends to be a model that some school districts look at. Some school districts look at the way that they can look at their Math 8 curriculum and other ways of pushing down some of that curriculum, so it better prepares students when they get to an Algebra 1, they have a better sense of some of the foundational areas that they need to be successful. So those are some of the snippets, and Ms. Sniffen, I can elaborate when it's her turn to come up here, that I know that we've heard that have set up the reason why that conversation is happening at the high school level.
Because if I, at face value, if I look at the student regents results for algebra, if my math's right, 89% of our students are at a performance level of 4 or 5 on last year's regents exam, which doesn't, there's always room for improvement, but it doesn't point to a glaring issue with students achieving the algebra credit,
Right.
Which I know can be a real hurdle in some school for some students on that pathway towards graduation, because it's a requirement. But I heard you say something that I think is really, and maybe Mr. Sassano said it, but you attribute it to him, which is the purpose here isn't to look at this in with the emphasis of just helping kids achieve the credit more readily. It's to help students achieve a level of mastery, to give us a sense of comfort, because we feel it's really important for students to attain a level of mastery in algebra in order for whatever they pursue thereafter.
That's directly the message that I'm hearing out of the high school math department.
Which I think is an important distinction, because at times it's just, how do we get the kids the credit?
Yeah.
And that's not the case here.
Right.
Right.
One quick question.
Yep.
On each of those moments of implementation, where you're kind of looking at these new, things you want to do with the curriculum, the teachers have access to CTLE credits on each aspect of that implementation, meaning these things are being done in-house. They have access to them. They're working collaboratively, all that type of stuff.
Yes and no. It depends on the, first of all, I think that most of what we're offering meet the criteria of the state of meeting CTLE. Yeah. A lot of it depends on the method of implementation. So when we're getting release time for our teachers to go through some of this, that's not something that's being entered into my learning plan. It has some of these, but there are many aspects of what we're seeing up there that are CTLE credit-bearing opportunities for our teachers. Absolutely.
I have a question overall just about our students with disabilities numbers, such as there. I mean, I know that oftentimes when you're talking about students with disabilities, you're talking about, each student has their own individual goals. So a lot of how we determine how proficient they are or not is based on their individual education program in one way or another. I'm curious to know, though, given where that number is, I think we would agree it'd be great if that was 100%. But do you have a goal in mind for, what is an acceptable sort of minimum threshold for our students with disabilities and proficiency? That's a hard question to ask.
Yeah,
You can say, oh boy, that's a difficult one.
I think the idea, for any student, but particularly, if you can dial in any subgroup of student, whether it's students with disabilities, ENL, economically disadvantaged, it's this concept of growth, right?
Yeah.
There's this idea that as they progress through any sort of learning educational system, that they gain, right? They get better from where they start to where they go. Sometimes that can get lost when you're talking about summative assessments like ELA or New York State assessments or even Regents exams, because they are so, for lack of a better term, high stakes. You walk in 1 or 2 days and that's what you get, and that's how that goes. And so I think that's important when we start talking about the intersection of multiple points of this data, right?
Yeah.
And so I guess to go back to that question is I don't have like a number I would say, but I do think that there are ways that we can look at student growth. And I think we all have stories where a kid may have gotten a 40 on one exam and then a year later he got a 61.
Yeah.
Still failed, but that's a 21% increase, and that's a tremendous thing to celebrate.
Yeah.
And so I think it's through all of these areas is starting to get better levels of clarity and asking questions about, what we would look at in some of our demographic of students and subgroups, and, where is that growth occurring? Is it on par with getting them? Obviously, the idea is to represent in better numbers in some of those ways. But I do think that's where the importance of go back to that phrase, that intersection of multiple points comes into play. And I think the New York State assessments provide one area, and then there are other areas that can helpfully provide alternate aspects to look into a child to see whether or not they're progressing in a way that we would feel is something that we'd want to celebrate.
Yeah. Thank you for answering that question generously, because it was asked generously, not.
No worries.
So I appreciate it. Yeah.
No worries. Yeah, so, I think going into next year, I think one of the things that we're looking to do is continue in this idea of embedding the curriculum articulation. K-12 is a norm, and I spoke to that a little bit earlier, not as just kind of this thing we do, but just kind of who we are. So when we sit down and write curriculum or we co-plan together, we talk about new courses, that, a thing that we do is just we document this now, and that's a pathway for the way that we communicate our standards, how we're meeting state standards and infusing kind of what we value. The elementary literacy professional development, I say, is something we would absolutely, I think we started on this journey thinking this is a relationship we want to build, and I think that the early gains we've seen so far through our consultant as well as the engagement of our staff are extremely promising. She comes back in February for 3 more days. We'd love to see that work kind of continue moving forward in the next year as well. I said the expansion of the summer curriculum writing. I think that there's going to be more opportunities for teachers to want to do this, particularly when we talk about the elementary work, the high school work. We've talked about the science. I mean, every area has got some sort of work that needs to be done, but as we think about implementing a new math program, if we got there, summer work is a key piece that we're thinking about taking advantage and leveraging for for fidelity of implementation when we get there. Obviously, depending on how we get there with our implementation of our math resource, there's going to be curriculum writing and professional development that goes along with kind of making sure that we do that in the right way. This math accelerator resource that I talked about a little bit, we'd love to see that continue in broader specs for kids. We think it provides a tremendous amount of opportunities for kids. And then, I get back to this professional development opportunities for faculty, staff, and administrators. I think our faculty has done a really great job of utilizing PNW BOCES, but there are a number of other great areas and opportunities for our staff to engage with as we kind of come out of this non-travel area and start trying to re-engage back with some of these professional development opportunities. Thank you.
I'm sorry, I have one last question.
No,
if
sure.
that's okay. The summer curriculum writing, is that extra for teachers? Is that part of their job? Is that
No,
extra hours?
It's collectively bargained. There is a rate that teachers have that are compensated for per hour. It's an hourly rate. I don't have it off the top of my
No,
head.
that's fine. I was wondering. Thank you.
Do you want to apply?
No.
Unless there are any other questions.
No, I mean, just a comment. I mean, this whole, this issue of getting, of helping students be prepared to be like authentically successful in Algebra 1 is like, the Gates Foundation just said they're spending $1 billion on this over the next 10 years. It's not like this is a problem that's like particularly local to Haldane, right? I mean, they recognize that it's a big problem, not that, but it's definitely worth us to continue to, figure out how to address it. I think it's really great that you all recognize the need to pause on making a decision about the K-5 math curriculum, right, to make sure that you're making the right choice. And I guess my question, not for this, maybe actually when Dr. Selke presents later on this year, or maybe when Ms. Jamin does, is like, to get kids ready for Algebra 1, you've got to have that really strong it starts in kindergarten. I mean, and it really starts once kids start studying fractions, right? Just really making sure that those 2 math programs, and I know this is the goal of the district, but are really integrated well enough so that we're just really building towards that, success, for students.
Great.
So, yeah.
Thank you all.
Thank you so
Appreciate
much,
it.
Mr. Elder. Thank you. All right. Moving on to our communication from the public. The Haldane Board of Education desires and values input from the entire school community. This first public comment session is reserved for comments on our special presentations. For those who wish to address the board, please sign in and state your name for the record. Please keep your remarks to 3 minutes or less. Disparaging remarks and discussions of district personnel are prohibited. Although we do not engage in dialogue, we are listening. Please leave your contact information with our district clerk, Megan Shields, for prompt follow-up from the board president or superintendent. I don't think we have anyone, so let's moving on to our information reports. Ms. Jamin, elementary school.
Good evening. So I wanted to highlight a couple of the things. It always seems like a really quick board report from the December one to this one. We have the break and the excitement around entering the break at the elementary school, at least, although I'm sure high school students and middle school students are equally excited. But we've been doing a number of things that are still worth highlighting. So in the last couple of weeks and finishing up in this week, we now have 34 certified safety care providers within the district, K through 12, which is not a specifically elementary initiative, but it started and we are continuing, and it's really exciting because that helps our students when they are not just in crisis, but at any time they're struggling, having better de-escalation and support strategies. The idea behind safety care is preventing a crisis, preventing a student from entering that sort of situation. And so especially coming off of COVID and the separation, and I think the social emotional things we've seen students struggle with, and just when kids were farther apart, when they weren't sharing, when they weren't doing those things, they had less time to practice those skills. And so more frustrations entering their social interactions, more frustrations entering their peer interactions and their academic struggles, getting more of our teachers different and research-based de-escalation and support strategies is important. So I'm excited that our staff have been engaging with that. Both myself and Ms. Fawnin are certified trainers, and it's been exciting to get more and more of our teachers into those classes. So that's been great. Be there again tomorrow. And then we've had a lot of community engagement recently. So the PTA and the EDI committee are once again doing a Lunar New Year celebration with our students. So Lunar New Year, I believe, I know is this weekend. So on Friday, our elementary and middle school students will be going home with red envelopes that are traditionally associated with the holiday. They won't have money in them as part of the tradition, but they will have messages of kindness and support, which is just as valuable. And we've also had some community members coming into the classroom to present. So Mrs. Mercurio, who is an elementary parent, pushed into 5th grade and did presentations on Haiti and their Independence Day, which is January 1st, which was something I had not learned about. So she was presenting on the history of Haitian Independence Day. And Miss Winter Moyer pushed in. She's a parent and a writer, and she pushed into our 3rd grade classrooms to supplement their persuasive writing units. So our students are getting a chance to hear from authentic community members around their experiences and bring that into the classroom. And last but not least, next week we are doing our kindergarten parent night. It is once again that time of year when things start going very fast, and we will soon have new kindergartners. So I know you are always interested in how many we're going to get. Right now, our outreach to the local preschools has that number around 42. That's from local preschoolers. So some students aren't enrolled in preschool, and that number could go up. Some of those preschool students could choose to enroll in a different school or hold their children back, and that would make that number go down. But our current estimate is right around 42, which has been the pretty consistent number for the last couple years. And then some years we've gotten all 42. Some years we've gotten a little bit less, bouncing right around there.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Chairman. Dr. Seal?
Good evening, everyone, and Happy New Year. I'm very happy to be with you here on the eve of almost the end of the second quarter, which is halfway through the school year, and it's shocking how fast time goes. Ms. Festo was in with the 7th grade talking about course requests for the next school year, and we'll be in with the 8th grade shortly to go over their course requests into high school and start those individual meetings. So time is marching on. I will briefly say that the scope and sequence for mathematics is fascinating, and there's a lot of different schools that do things slightly differently, and we've been having very exciting conversations. I'm particularly excited about the prospect of strengthening the scope and sequence earlier on, up to and including the possibility at some point in the future where there would be algebra for all 8th grade students. It's just, right now we're in the conversational stage. Nothing has been decided, but there are a lot of different ways to look at the math scope and sequence. So that's all I'll say about that for the time being, but much more to follow. So other happenings that are coming up very quickly. On the evening of January 24th at 6 p.m., there's going to be an 8th grade parent night for Frost Valley. Frost Valley is different this year, having nothing to do with COVID, but the fact that we're going in winter instead of in spring. And I hear from Ms. Sniffen and our other historians and history keepers of Haldane that this used to be a winter trip. So I haven't seen it in my time as a winter trip, and I've been excited to hear from Mrs. Horn and her communications with Frost Valley about snowshoeing and having the fire going at the lodges and all kinds of other tracks in the snow if it's snowing up there, and all kinds of other really delightful winter activities that can come. It is if you know the area of Frost Valley, it is very cold, so it'll be a very interesting experience. I really hope that doesn't dissuade any of our 8th graders from attending, because it is a pivotal experience for our 8th grade students, especially now with the technology that we have, because it's also, there's no cell service. So it's, it was a pivotal experience before, cell phones and the internet and everything, and now it's taken on a whole new level. So hopefully all parents, 8th grade parents, will consider sending their child to Frost Valley this year. The Haldane Community Read is coming up on February 16th, which I think in Camilla's board report, that's the same night as one of the high school events, and the timing matches up nicely too, because the community read of Green Glass House by Kate Milford is from 4:30 to 6, and then I think the high school event starts at 6:30. So everyone is welcome to come to the community read, so I highly recommend coming, and the book is fantastic as well. In the spring, we have 2 supplementary speakers coming to enrich our PBIS program. Haldane Middle School is True Blue, Teamwork, Responsibility, Understanding, and Excellence. And one of those speakers is going to be through the PTA Learning Differences, Dr. Galante, who wrote Anxiety Relief for Teens, and that will be in March. And also in March as well, Dr. Michael Fallon, who does a performance of You Don't Know Me Till You Know Me, that is designed to build empathy. And these experiences are built into our schedule this year to support the strengthening of middle schoolers' teamwork and their ability to build an inclusive school environment. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ms. Sniffen?
Good evening, everyone. Just 2 things to highlight. The first thing I'd like to highlight is our work towards the Seal of Civic Readiness here at Haldane, which is an initiative that we haven't been able to roll out yet. We kind of put it on pause for a little while, but Jackie McGrath, the department chair in social studies, and I have been in conversation with Greg Fredericks at BOCES in terms of our process of rolling this out. And the Seal of Civic Readiness is similar, and you've heard me speak a lot about the Seal of Biliteracy. It's a similar process in that students demonstrate readiness, and this would be civic readiness. Their knowledge, their skills, their mindsets, their experiences, their participation. It can culminate in a capstone project. There is a rubric similar to the Seal of Biliteracy where students would then need to show a mastery of both their knowledge of civics and their participation. So we'll be meeting with Greg on February 23rd to try to roll out a timeline and a plan to execute that.
Along those lines, this will be our first year that we are looking at 20 students that are eligible for the Seal of Biliteracy. Last year, I believe we had 7 that ended up receiving the seal upon graduation, and this year we're hoping to see all 20 students through. Now, we go back to the small n factor when we're looking at data. Let's remember this is a larger class, a larger cohort than we had last year. Last year we were about 70 students. This year we're about 90 graduates. So proportionally, looking at math, we're close to being in line. Along those lines, you're hearing a lot about math tonight. And I turned over to my colleagues and I'm like, well, there's part of my board report, but I think it's important too to hear my voice and part of the work as it relates to algebra and algebra readiness. And I think while you're triangulating your data and you're looking at many factors and many variables, one of the things that stood out to me when I was looking at Josh's data and information was also the geometry scores. And I don't know, we kind of went a little quickly through those. Yeah. But when we talk about algebra readiness and getting through the algebra exam and saying, okay, you have your 1 Regents credit check, that's not the goal, right? The goal is that our students are finding success in algebra, feeling ready for geometry, feeling ready for Algebra 2 trig, feeling ready for Intro to Calculus. Whatever that goal may be, really building that foundation of readiness. And some concerns in looking at one data point being the Regents, but we're also looking at other data points. We're looking at NWEA. We're looking at skills that students have coming in classrooms. And one of the conversations is around an integrated algebra approach. So while some schools call it like pre-algebra, like that's really focusing on those algebra skills. And as we know, right, the spiral nature of mathematics and the spiral nature of the curriculum, that integrated algebra is going to pull in some of those, what we would normally consider geometry skills, into an integrated algebra class. So one of the conversations we're having, there was a math department meeting today where we're looking at this, we're discussing it, we're looking at multiple measures and data. Mr. Sassano and I are meeting again tomorrow, and then Josh, Marianne, myself, Mr. Sassano, and the rest of the math department are going to take a further look at this. We've offered integrated algebra in the past. It wouldn't be a new course. It's one of those things that depending on need, you look at offering. So if you'll look at my board report, historically we offer algebra and then algebra with a lab and not an integrated algebra. So the conversation now is, do you offer algebra and integrated algebra? Do you offer algebra with lab, integrated algebra? And what does that mean for your FTE, right? Your teachers? Do you have the people for the sections? And then the conversations about co-taught classes. So all those discussions are happening now as we look to build our master schedule for next year. So just kind of, that's where we are with algebra.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you. Any questions? Okay, great. All right. I was going to say, I was going to thought it was going to be a battle. That's all right. Dr. Keisha?
Walked up with such authority, I was going to have to square my shoulders.
Josh is like, I have one more thing to say. I didn't say enough before.
So I'm Regina Cation. I'm the Director of Pupil Personnel Services at Haldane. Good evening, President McNall, trustees, and Dr. Benante. So my report will be fairly short and I think kind of positive. I'm still coming off the sort of somewhat high feeling from last week when we had the members of PCG, our audit team, come to campus. So it was a big lift to get it all underway. Kim Patinella was really essential and helpful to me to do all of that scheduling. I think we laid a good foundation with our leadership team and our building principals particularly to really communicate so that faculty and staff knew what to expect. They knew who was coming. They knew the scope of the audit. I don't feel like people, at least they didn't tell me that they felt that they were personally under scrutiny. So it seemed that people were welcoming. Actually, I got a lot of positive feedback. They were really raving actually about our district, about some of the learning that they were witnessing, some of the good teaching, but also how welcoming everyone was. People were like, yes, come in the classroom. And people were willing to join in on some of the focus groups. And in fact, tonight we ran a second parent focus group, and some of the people who attended in person attended again because I think they were having an opportunity to be heard, and so that's a really good thing. They're also going to run a second session with the administrators, so I really got the feeling that they were taking a lot of time to really listen. So that was a big positive, and obviously we'll have hopefully a lot more to talk about in the next few months with that. And then the business of our department continues. We're working on setting up annual reviews. We're in collaboration with conversations that have to do with scheduling, and everything overlaps. It's much like your campus master plan and the domino effect. If you do one thing, it leads to another. But some of the solutions that might help some of the people who struggled in math may also help our special education students. And I always like to have that universal design for learning lens, in that if we do something, if we build something that's good for many students, it's usually good for all of our students. And so something like a pre-algebra, if we were to align our schedules between the high school and the middle school, we might be able to have that available for 8th graders and for 9th graders if the schedules align. So we're thinking outside the box, and I think that's the way we're going to find some of our best solutions. And to answer your question that you had said before, proficiency, yeah. That's the criteria. We want all students to meet proficiency, and how they get there, or what we have to do to get them there can vary, but I think that's our goal always, for all of our students. Mm-hmm. Does anyone have any specific questions for me tonight?
I participated in both of those parent groups. The one this evening as well. I was one of those parents that came twice.
Okay, great.
And I can. My wife had to remind me that I had another meeting that I had to go to, as a matter of fact. But I just wanted to echo what you had to say about the conversation that happened in those rooms, and what our consultants, the questions they asked, and I thought it was there were 2 wonderful hours spent, I thought, and they commented to us as well that they felt like it was a very generous community with lots of support everywhere across the board. So it was great.
Well, I thank you, and I did get the impression people felt like they could speak, and hopefully we'll continue to engage in some serious listening and learning. Yeah. So thank you.
Thank you. Josh, there we go.
Thank you.
Josh Elder. Yes.
Josh Elder.
Mm-hmm.
Great. I think it's been alluded to a little bit, but part of my update was just talk a little bit about with the master schedule work. And in the fall, in October and November, we had engaged a group of 10 teachers from around the district in various aspects to get together and have some really good conversations about our master schedules, our 3 schedules. And so, we have 3 building principals who know their schedules inside and out, very much so. But engaging our faculty in this conversation is essential in trying to think about where it goes. They're the ones who do it every single day, along with our students. Not that our principals don't, but they see the different levels that we may or not see. So these sessions were really designed to engage them and elicit feedback into the positive ways that our schedule does, and our schedules do some extremely positive things for our students, and also find the ways that our schedules might not be, or where there's areas that we would take a look at, as Dr. Benante said, really investigate ways that we might be able to be a little more efficient for our teachers, and then obviously that benefits our students as well. And so we did that in October and November, and then in December, our administrative team had a couple of sessions to debrief this process with one of our consultants, just kind of think through this and continuously kind of unpack this information and kind of categorize it and think about where we are. So as we look to re-engage this work, we've kind of looked back on some of that and have started, obviously, again, those conversations about what this work looks like in the coming, for the rest of this year and the next year as well as we do this. The only thing I would say from a scheduling standpoint is schedules are incredibly complex, and it's the butterfly effect, right? Like you change one thing and it has like 7 variations off of it. And as you can hear, as you'll hear this thing, you start moving certain things, you just see all these intersections that come to play. So I think it's right to kind of step back and really think through a lot of these things, because you don't want to create unconsciously problems for yourself in the future that you didn't really take the time to just kind of sit back and just kind of think through a little bit. And so I think we're in the place with that. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. That was Josh Elder, in case you wanted to know. All right. Mr. Bauerlein was excused for this evening, so. And Mr. Twardy both, thank you so much. Do you have anything you'd like to say on their behalf, Phil?
No.
Great, thank you. All right, moving on to consent agenda minutes. May I have a motion, please?
So moved. Second?
Any conversation? No? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? No. Consent agenda financial. May I have a motion, please?
So moved. Second?
All right, any discussion? No? All right.
Have you picked the text yet? Who picks the text?
Oh, I guess I should say here before we vote that an organization that I work for is being awarded something, and I don't know, I should have asked this before, should I recruit? I am no way going to economically benefit from this, but if I were to recuse myself from the vote, we would have a quorum outside of that. I don't know if it's necessary. That's what I mean. We would be fine. So.
Except, yeah, I mean, we could. Oh, I don't think it's necessary
Good. I
though,
just wanted
because
to-
that's
I
all.
just
It's
wanted to be
also
why I
transparent
asked. I
about
was just curious if you get to pick the text for the sixth graders for the
My
grant.
teaching artist will choose that. I won't be there. We are speaking about a grant that is being awarded to the Hudson Valley Shakespeare Festival, which is my employer. That's why we bring that up there. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? No. Moving on to consent agenda personnel. May I have a motion, please?
So moved.
Second.
Anything here you'd like to discuss? No? No? All right. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? No. Board committee reports. Let's see, these are here for any policy committee updates?
Yes, I can give policy up.
That'd be great.
We sent the audit, the full audit back, or Megan did, to Erie One recently, and it should be posted sometime in February. The committee continues our read through of the policy manual, as well as keeping up with the policy pulse updates that we get from Erie BOCES. And I did want to mention some work that Dr. Benante really took upon himself to bring to the committee. There was a situation that happened recently in a district where some unfortunate things happened, and it really raised some real concerns for how it was handled by the administration, how parents were notified, et cetera. And Dr. Benante took this as an opportunity to really stop and look at our policies when something like this happens, and to think about, are there some revisions that we want to make? And so we're pursuing that. And so, I think it sort of speaks to, the benefit of having, a healthy policy committee, that policies are something that we're looking at, Is there anything you wanted to add about what
The only
you're
thing I would
doing?
add, because some of those matters and what we learned from experiences that other districts have, whether they be positive or negative, in this case it just happened to be, it's a negative one, unfortunately, but are not only the policy implications, but then the more administrative implications of that.
yeah.
So, and we're doing that too. So
That
there's
makes
some
sense.
policy implications that we're discussing, which specifically relate to parent notification in the event that your child is the potential victim of conduct that could be a point of concern, or is an alleged offender in that. And interestingly, our policies that maybe apply in such situations don't really speak to parent notification, but we want to make sure that we outline that parents should be informed in a timely manner, one way or the other, so that, again, they're aware of what their child may be experiencing in school. But beyond that, there's all sorts of learnings from managing investigations, reporting responsibilities of our school leaders that we're also discussing with our team to make sure that those practices are in good order. I believe them to be, but it's a moment to pause and just confirm that.
Great.
Yep, and so, we're going to meet again and just continue at this point until the next audit comes. Really, our focus will be on any sort of unusual thing that comes up, but by primarily focusing on just continuing to read through the manual.
Great. Thank you, and thank you. Update from Westchester Putnam School Board Association. I guess I attended a community conversation on Friday, the topic of which was how districts are continuing to investigate ED&I. I shared out a bit about us recently updating our policy in the meeting, based on some of the other policies that were provided, I really felt good about ours and felt like it was a good reflection of our community. Districts across the region continue to, I would say, think ahead about how they can be intentional when it comes to ED&I. And one takeaway that I got in terms of, I think inclusion is a word that means something very different to a lot of different districts, and that might be the hardest word to come to agreement about. But it might be the one about which I think most districts can coalesce. It's just interesting, if that makes sense. But if, once again, invitation, anybody can participate in those conversations, and they occur via Zoom, and they're actually quite interesting to hear other board members kind of speak in draft about what's going on in their districts. Great, moving on to new business. Ms. Shields?
CSE and CPSE recommendations. Be it resolved that upon the recommendation of the Superintendent of Schools, the Board of Education hereby approves the recommendations of the Committees on Special Education and Preschool Special Education as presented.
May I have a motion, please?
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? No? Right. This is our second communication from the public, all district matters. I don't think anyone has joined us since our last public convert. So let's move on to board reflections. Does anyone have anything they'd like to share? I'll share something. On the selection of Oklahoma as the musical that's coming.
Yes.
it brought to mind to me.
That's what I heard. Yeah.
That's right. That was the first musical that I did when I was in high school. But more importantly, I recently, my high school drama teacher, Mr. Darrell Matthews, long in retirement, passed away 2 weeks ago. And so I had the opportunity to reflect on the impact of this person in my life. And I'm one of those students who did not excel very much in most of, I was a bright kid who didn't apply himself until I became involved in theater. So I'm one of those students that benefited from what we called pre-algebra at the time and was always a year behind. But it took sort of this man's investment in where my potential lay outside of my academic commitments to really encourage me to see how I could find success otherwise. And he continues to be a beacon for me and a person that I think of frequently. So I know that many of our students feel the same about all of our in-class and support students, and I just wanted to share that in remembrance of him as well. So, and Oklahoma will be fun. So. Anything else? No? All right, Phil?
Mr. Matthews, it was?
Darrell Matthews.
Darrell Matthews. Yeah. You speak and you share your experience. It reminds me of some of what our students said at the beginning of this evening, but the importance sometimes of those programs that surround the core academic areas as a pathway for a lot of kids to further then engage in school.
Yes.
And the core subject areas. I think your experience there speaks to that and the importance of that and having robust opportunities for our kids. I have no further reflections other than that was a very nice way a beautiful way to honor him.
Thank you.
And it wasn't until, I knew I had something I wanted to say at board reflections, but I couldn't remember it until Phil spoke. Is it okay for me to go ahead and do that?
Of course.
The fact that they spoke about, in such a heartfelt way about 10th period, I just think speaks so highly of our high school teachers and our high school students and the high school program. I remember when my son was in high school, 10th period is a real thing, and kids, there's a lot of kids go and want to go and feel really supported, and that's just a huge success. I don't know if it's still the case, but it's really subscribed to, lots of kids go. And anyway, I just think that speaks so highly of our high school program and teachers and students that we have that available and that it's so valued and so used by our students. I really appreciate that. So I apologize. I knew I had something to say, but I hadn't jotted it down.
Thank you, Peggy. All right, like to adjourn. May I have a motion, please?
Motion.
A second?
Second.
All those in favor? Aye. Nobody's opposed.